The wonderful world of fashion. Every week, new goods arrive in our shops. It's called fast fashion, and it's unbelievably cheap, like the French discounter Auchan. For its In Extenso label, the company claims to produce clothing in a clean and sustainable manner. H&M, one of the largest fast fashion producers in the world, has a collection called Conscious. The company says it stands for sustainable and responsible production. The German fashion discounter Kick claims its label OK stands for safe working conditions. Many of these clothes are made in Bangladesh. The country has been in the headlines for years because of dangerous working conditions, such as the use of highly toxic chemicals and sewing machines running hot, causing disastrous fires. With the collapse of the Rana Plaza factory building in April 2013, the myth of the clean fashion industry was shattered. 1,127 people died and at least 2,000 were injured. Rescue workers struggled for over a week to save workers trapped beneath the rubble. Amid the rubble, the labels of many fashion brands, including Kick's OK label and Auchan's In Extenso. Following the disaster, the European Union called for change.
The big clients of the garments and the apparel industry in Bangladesh have a responsibility too. They need to take responsibility for their supply chain.
But are commitments for better standards enough, or do we need internationally binding laws? Since the Rana Plaza collapse, fashion retailers like French discounter Auchan continue to sell clothes they claim are produced responsibly. Marie-Laure Ghislain, a lawyer for the French NGO Sherpa, which supports victims of economic crime, says that's not good enough. She wants companies to be held liable for violations against international standards. Her focus is on Auchan. Its labels were found at the Rana Plaza.
The big challenge for Sherpa is to hold the corporations accountable and to bring them to court in their home countries for any violations along their entire supply chain, for everything they do abroad. Auchan is a very typical case.
Pimki, Orsay, and the sportswear retailer Decathlon are also part of the Auchan empire that belongs to the Moulier family, the richest family in France. In an online video, the corporation denies any business ties to the Rana Plaza factory. Given that one NGO found a pair of trousers bearing our brand name in the rubble 20 days after the disaster occurred, we wish to forcefully restate we never placed any orders with any of the Rana Plaza workshops which did not satisfy our social quality criteria, so no link, either direct or indirect, exists.
N'existe entre Auchan et ses entreprises.
Auchan denies any links, despite clear signs to the contrary. Sherpa wants to force the corporation to take responsibility and has filed a legal complaint.
The charge is based on Auchan's own code of conduct. In it, Auchan promises to safeguard the basic rights of workers employed by its foreign subcontractors.
À toute sa chaîne de production, les droits fondamentaux des travailleurs à l'étranger.
In France, it's an offence to make false or misleading marketing promises. This is where Sherpa is building its case. It accuses the Lille-based Auchan Corporation of misleading its customers with regards to the working conditions at its suppliers in Bangladesh.
The state prosecution in Lille has accepted our argumentation and launched a preliminary investigation. The case will set an international precedent against a large French corporation. But our legal system lacks the political will and the financial means to conduct the kind of international investigation needed to bring the case to court. That's why we must gather evidence ourselves to support the investigation.
We follow the most important lead, Auchan's clothing. A quarter of all their goods are produced in Bangladesh. In the capital, Dhaka, more than 3 million people work in some 5,000 textile factories. Auchan alone has 67 official direct suppliers. Gisela is on her way to the ruins of the Rana Plaza. She wants to find out what has happened to the victims. It took more than 2 years for $30 million to be paid into an aid fund. 35 companies contributed, among them H&M and Kik. Auchan donated $1.5 million as a sign of compassion. Many of the victims have never been found and their families are still fighting for compensation. This woman was paid a one-off sum of 900 euros. It was just enough for 1 year.
My son worked at Rana Plaza. I sold food in front of the factory. I haven't seen my son since. We have to beg for food now. If we don't get help, we starve.
Even today, survivors are still searching the ruins for clothes that can be used. Many of the large corporations no longer feel any responsibility to the survivors. Almost all of them have asked for written guarantees that their one-off donations do not constitute any acceptance of liability, including Auchan. That's despite the fact that a company called Phantom, which was located at the Rana Plaza, was producing clothes for Auchan. It's not just Auchan labels that were found in the rubble. There were also detailed production manuals for Auchan trousers. The former Rana Plaza workers live directly behind the ruin. Gisela is looking for witnesses who can shed light on the working conditions at Phantom. The young women were severely injured. None of them can work as seamstresses anymore.
You were saying that your manager insisted that you got into the factory?
Yes, we didn't want to go inside the factory because of the cracks in the building. Then the power was cut and the generator started up. The whole building started to shake. I ran as fast as I could. Around me, everything was falling apart. But the exits were blocked.
Her uncle, the son of the older woman, didn't make it. His body has never been found. He worked next to her on the 6th floor.
So do you recognize this brand, this label?
Yes, I remember them. These labels were attached to the waistband of the trousers.
She confirms that more than 1,000 seamstresses were forced to work at this dangerous site to produce clothing for the Inextenso label. But Auchan claims to know nothing about it.
The label is used on the waist of the pant.
This girl is also very familiar with Inextenso, having worked here for years. How old were you when you started working here?
She was 13. She was 13.
13.
13.
Child labor for Inextenso. Was she an exception?
Lots of underage girls were working there. I know some who died, 2 co-workers my age, but their bodies weren't found.
Important witnesses in the case against Auchan. These women are willing to testify in a French court. Clothing for the French fashion discounter was mass-produced in the Rana Plaza, even with forced and child labor. Did such conditions also exist among other Auchan suppliers? An insider gets in touch with lawyer Gisela. He's a former Auchan textile manager. Shanti Rajan Dey worked at the Auchan office in Dhaka. from 2009 until 2014.
For the neck.
Yeah.
Neck tape. That is totally different. Ocean starting from this business in Bangladesh, they were only looking for the low price. Prices, they need competitive price. They are not looking for the, okay, we'll give you the better price to ensure you the compliance. Never ever. Compliance is totally supply responsibility for Ocean.
Can you tell us if there are some factories where Auchan is producing and the working conditions are not as good as they should be?
Nightingale have structural problem. Their building have not enough stair and congested factory. Very very congested work environment. And once I got actually when I was in Ocean, one time there was a problem. They found child labor in Ocean. Yes, they are continuing business. They are not punishing anything to them. To factories. Even though this is actually non-compliance factory, Fashionaire.
Gisela wants to verify what the former Auchan manager has told her by visiting the Nightingale factory. But investigating lawyers are not welcome here. That's why she has to pretend to be a French fashion designer. Here she finds the same Auchan production instructions that were found in the rubble of the Rana Plaza.
For example, the sleeve length, the neckline depth and everything?
She can't confirm whether Nightingale employs minors. The workers aren't allowed to talk to potential clients. The factory building is narrow and hot. Around the only exits, there are lots of easily flammable textiles. Still, the owner insists the factory complies with all safety regulations. Via the labor union, Gisela is put in touch with workers from several Auchan suppliers. She meets them secretly in a backyard. The women don't want to be recognized. They're afraid of being fired.
The main problem is that the targets are too hard. I can only do a part of the target. I work the whole day, I can't drink water, and I get only 6,000 taka. If I don't reach my target, I have to stay in the factory. I don't get extra pay for more hours, and I never get my money on time. They pay whenever they want.
None of the women have a written employment contract that protects them. They all are at the mercy of their employers.
It's very hard. You wanted to say something before about threats. Can you tell us? Can you explain that? Threatened and beaten?
If we complain, we might be beaten. The people from the company try to slap us if we complain. They even have people from outside hired to beat us during the break or after work, and everyone who complains gets dismissed. They make you sign a blank paper. It's your resignation letter.
More than 90% of the workers are women. They're particularly defenseless against such intimidation strategies. It's mainly men who dare to protest on the streets. Even after the Rana Plaza disaster, workers' rights in Bangladesh continue to be violated. The unions call for living wages and the observance of human rights. The situation is escalating. The government seems to take the side of the textile industry. The protests are brutally suppressed. With a view to such production countries, the United Nations introduced basic business and human rights principles in 2011 for all member states.
There are some things that states must do. They must protect against human rights abuses by all parties, including companies. And if the local government is incapable of acting because of a conflict situation, then the home country where a company comes from has to step up and provide greater oversight. So states have to act.
The European Commission has been calling on its members to comply with these principles since 2012. Governments should ensure that companies adhere to human rights throughout their entire supply chain. How they ensure this is left up to the governments themselves. After the Rana Plaza disaster, members of the French National Assembly called for the introduction of a proper law. One of them is the Green MP Danielle Auroi. She's a member in the Committee for European Affairs and an expert in international law.
Donc il faut bien aussi qu'elle en prenne la charge, si je puis dire. Et qu'après tout, il y a
The principles of equality, liberty, and fraternity must apply also to the business world. There must be no difference between workers in France and the Third World with regard to this. The EU requires us to have objective regulations to ensure that our laws are upheld. We, the people of France, must live up to our historic role and revolutionize the laws.
Historique, en quelque sorte, de la France dans la révolution des droits, qu'ils soient nationaux, européens ou internationaux.
France is the first country looking to revise its laws. But what about Germany? Politicians here continue to pin their hopes on a dialogue with industry. During Germany's G7 presidency, the German Minister for Economic Cooperation, Gerd Müller, hosted an international conference in March 2015, in part to discuss this issue. Ministers, business representatives, and Nobel Prize laureates took part. The German government likes to present itself as a pioneer in human rights and labor rights issues.
Meine Damen und Herren, eine Jeans für 100 Euro, die hier in Berlin verkauft wird.
Ladies and gentlemen, from a pair of jeans sold here in Berlin for 100 euros, the seamstress in Bangladesh gets only 2 euros on average. She's paid 15 cents an hour, works 6 days a week with no job security or health care. We wear these clothes without giving it any thought. They're cheap, they're fashionable, and this is exactly why we need a textile alliance.
Deshalb haben wir das Textilbündnis gegründet.
Müller has been promoting his textile alliance since 2014. He wants industry to voluntarily agree to introduce legally binding work contracts and pay living wages. The minister has failed to get any of the big brand names to sign up for his alliance, but this hasn't stopped him from plugging his idea.
Ich habe noch keinen in Deutschland gehört, keinen Unternehmer und
I've not heard anyone in Germany, no manufacturer, no retailer, who has said this is not the right way. Everybody knows this is good, and it's what we must do. And that's why I'm hopeful that businesses and retailers will give themselves a push and say, let's do it. And if Germany can lead the way, then we can also raise standards throughout Europe. I'm convinced that other EU countries will follow suit.
In der EU lassen sich dann überzeugen, auch mitzumachen.
Why don't you follow the French example instead? They're creating a new law. That's my last question.
Good.
Good, thank you for a great interview. The idea of a law doesn't seem as appealing to Minister Müller, but how does he expect to realize his idea of a textile alliance in Europe if he can't get the big fashion labels to sign up? Shortly after the conference, the minister makes a U-turn. He invites the textile industry to set their own standards, giving up on his original goals. Now suddenly the industry is willing to sign up, from Kick to the high-end label Hugo Boss. But why did the industry reject Minister Müller's initial plan? We're referred to the German Trade Association for this question. Its director, Stefan Gent, represents more than 400,000 businesses, among them H&M and Kick.
Wenn Sie im letzten Jahr die Verpflichtung haben als Handelsunternehmen.
As a retailer, if you had an obligation to guarantee a living wage to workers in these production countries, you could not have done so, neither practically nor legally. If they had signed such an action plan last year, they would have been liable for this. But they can't be held liable because they have neither the instrument nor the actual power to ensure that a company in Bangladesh, for example, pays its seamstresses this wage. Remarkable, given that the textile industry has for many years been promising exactly this, that they aim to pay living wages to all their suppliers around the world. With the help of the German government, these companies can continue to make promises that are not legally binding. The opposition in Germany feels cheated. Müller's Textile Alliance is a voluntary plan. As such, it's only good for the image of the companies and the government, but does nothing for those who need help. Unlike in France, there's no criminal liability for corporations in Germany, but that's exactly what the German Left Party is calling for. They want companies to be liable for human rights abuses worldwide. Politicians share in the guilt if they don't make corporations accountable, because it's their responsibility to create the boundaries for economic activity. That's the basic idea of a social market economy. But if politicians neglect to set boundaries, and that's what they're doing with regard to the overseas activities of German companies, then they're partly responsible for such human rights abuses. Nima Movassat knows what he's talking about. He's been to Bangladesh many times and knows the reality behind the clean image of German industry. A study by the University of Maastricht ranks German companies 5th place when it comes to human rights abuses. That's a shocking conclusion. 5th place for companies that claim to respect human rights and have codes of conduct. That can't be. The study evaluated 1,800 UN-documented human rights abuses. KIK is an example of a company that actually refuses to pay compensation to victims in their textile factories. Does KIK really not adhere to its own code of conduct in Bangladesh? They claim the safety and health of workers mustn't be put at risk. To ensure this, they conduct unannounced safety inspections at their suppliers.
That's a factory?
Yeah.
Despite this, factories producing KIK textiles in Bangladesh have burned down. In 2012, a fire broke out in the Tazreen factory. 120 workers were burned alive, unable to escape their workplace. There were no fire ladders and the emergency exits were blocked. The fire services in Dakar's industrial districts are regularly called out, despite claims of frequent independent safety checks. In the last 10 years, fires have killed more than 600 people. We hear from a relative of one of the victims. The fire started on a standard sewing machine. A cylinder burst and the fire quickly spread. Everyone tried to flee at once and many couldn't get out. About 50 to 60 people were trapped inside. The pressure to produce fast fashion to short production deadlines comes at a high price. But the big foreign contractors know how to dodge their responsibility. The most popular argument is that they simply don't know all the sites where their clothes are produced. Several factories producing clothes for H&M have also gone up in flames. In 2010, for example, at Garib & Garib, the unions called on contractors to sign a legally binding agreement to implement common fire and building safety regulations. It's called the Accord Agreement. But it wasn't until the collapse of the Rana Plaza that 200 companies finally signed it. Since then, independent safety inspections have been carried out at many subcontracting factories. All were found to have serious safety hazards. This despite the fact that for years textile companies have been claiming to regularly inspect suppliers.
People can show you certificates from the fire service or from so on. So I think they're just basing that on a lot of documentation, which we didn't care less about documentation. We wanted to see if the building was safe. And so we went in and did an engineering analysis. And so we would find a huge discrepancy, as you're saying, between what was actually there and whether it met any of their codes and standards, which, like I say, none of them do.
The fashion chains appear to have been misleading their customers with inaccurate safety reports. Within 6 months, all of the shortcomings have to be fixed. Among them, missing emergency exits, dangerous electric components, and unstable walls.
It was very slow to start. the remediation work. The things that were easy were done very quickly in most factories. Then in some factories, the things that were more difficult were also getting done. But in the majority of factories, it was really just some of the simple fixes that were done. And we go back and now we're a year later. And in too many cases, very little has been done. And so the real challenge is to get that remediation work done.
Accord says that every fashion company shares the responsibility to ensure renovation work is carried out at their suppliers. So how can it be that the conditions have still not been significantly improved? H&M, the biggest contractor in Bangladesh, has registered 229 suppliers with Accord, but till today, none of them comply with its safety standards. Our next point of call, a shirt factory called Stylecraft. After the inspection, parts of the factory had to be vacated immediately.
Hello, I work for German TV. I've come to see what's happened here since the Accord inspection.
We're not allowed to take a look inside the factory. At another H&M supplier, Libas Textiles, we receive a more friendly welcome. 3,300 people work here, 48 hours a week. With overtime hours, a seamstress can make an average of 90 euros a month. Even in Bangladesh, that's barely enough to live on. It's cramped and hot inside. There are regular power cuts. In the event of a fire, many people would be harmed here. The fire ladder is too narrow. But there's no money for a new one. The manager here says he's doing his best to comply with the Accord safety requirements.
We are paying, the owner is paying now. Owner is paying. We are paying now, right? So it would have been better if somebody could help us, even long-term loan or with minimum interest or less interest. If they could, then there would have been, for some factories, some owner would have been far better.
Accord requires companies like H&M to contribute to the remediation costs. H&M informs us that it's supporting the efforts of 32 suppliers. This is news to Accord, which only knows of 11 cases for all the 200 fashion brands who signed the deal. We take a look at another H&M supplier, Le Nouveau Tex. Following an inspection in 2014, this factory had to be evacuated immediately. The entire building was in danger of collapsing and workers' lives were acutely at risk. Now the factory is operating again, but it's no longer producing for H&M. The purpose of the Accord is to raise safety standards, not for contractors to abandon suppliers that are found in need of renovation. Here at Le Nouveau Tex, nothing has been done to improve safety.
For how long did H&M produce here?
Actually, we are starting the business just 2 years before. Now we stop with H&M 1 year, like 1 year.
So exactly after your factory was listed red, H&M stopped the order?
Not only that, not only Accord issue, H&M, we have some issues in our ETP.
The company has clearly had problems with its wastewater and a whole string of other issues for a long time. That didn't stop H&M subcontracting a completely unsafe factory for 2 years, even though H&M's code of conduct states that dangerous machinery, unsafe workspaces and buildings are not acceptable. It was only after the Accord inspectors documented the appalling condition of the factory that H&M pulled out. This is exactly what the Accord agreement is trying to avoid. Contractually, H&M is obliged to maintain its business relationship with the factory while it's carrying out safety improvements. When contractors simply withdraw their business, it's the workforce that suffers. Many have lost their livelihoods. H&M tells us they do everything they can to avoid job losses. To find out if Le Nouveau Tex is an exceptional case, we ask Kalpona Akhtar. Her organization documents all workers' complaints in cases where companies are found in breach of the accord.
I mean, they can demand through their, reports, glossy reports, that they have changed. But I would say, no, H&M didn't change, that they're supposed to, or they're supposed to be. And as you mentioned, there is many cases has been pending, like in the remediation process, where H&M supposed to be ensured that workers got all their severances, but they didn't. They pulled out business. I think there is at least 5 strong cases that where H&M pulled their business after even signing the accord.
H&M is no exception. Other international fashion chains fail to live up to their responsibility. Many workers are finally voicing their complaints, calling for job security and pay guarantees. At Techstream, another company on the Accord list, we hear of serious labor disputes. We want to find out which companies produce clothing here. We're not welcome, and we're told to leave. We're asked who drew our attention to the factory. Nearby, we meet some Techstream workers on their way to a labor union office. We show them various fashion labels to find out which ones the company produces for. The workers quickly identify the KIK label OK.
Is there any construction work going on in the factory?
All over the factory there are severe cracks in the ceiling and in the walls. I've told the manager many times, but he says no problem.
And when there was the earthquake, all the doors were locked. We were so scared, but we couldn't go out. Many people were injured.
Locked up in dangerous factories. Can this really be the case? That KIK continues to allow its clothes to be produced in such conditions despite the accord. The factory opposite, Mega Choice, is also said to be a subcontractor for KIK. The owner and managing director are willing to talk to us.
We're just asking, you close factory, you pay your salary, they don't open like.
And
even accord when came,
yeah,
KIK people, they want to avoid this matter. They didn't come. We are requesting them, please come, but they are not coming. When everything we settle from our side with the accord.
So may we have a look around the factory?
Yeah, okay, no problem.
Mega Choice had to let 300 workers go after KIK pulled out of the factory. The safety issues identified by Accord have not been rectified. Blocked emergency exits and a fire escape ladder that doesn't even reach the ground. KIK commissioned cheap clothing from this factory for months, but the safety of workers here is obviously not worth investing in. KIK is not willing to give us an interview. We make one last attempt at its German headquarters, but KIK just refers us to its code of conduct. In a written statement, the company says there are no contentions with Accord regarding the implementation of their guidelines. On the contrary, KIK even claims it's been praised by Accord for its constructive cooperation with its suppliers. Is this true? We asked the International Trade Union Association, Uni Global, in Brussels. The association is a co-signatory of Accord and represents the interests of workers.
So according to our findings, we also have a German company, which is has been involved in Rana Plaza Tazreen and others. And are these discussions ongoing, which are mentioned here?
Well, there are discussions with KIK. But how KIK sees that's up to them. We are in discussions on them, and we'll see what comes out of these discussions. Whenever we now have discussions with companies, because you have the threat of going to arbitration, it makes the nature of the discussion much more serious.
A first step has been made. The textile chains can be held accountable. But the accord only deals with fire and building safety issues in Bangladesh. The fashion industry poses other risks to its workers: the use of toxic chemicals and sandblasting jeans to make them look old. What's being done about this?
There has been a campaign against sandblasting by the labor movement, and a number of companies have said we will ban sandblasting, but again, it's a unilateral statement. It's just saying we ban it and there's no control about it.
The used look is as fashionable as ever. To achieve it, jeans are blasted with sand, a hazardous process. Till 2009, it was common practice in Turkey. But so many workers got sick, the government stepped in and banned the sandblasting. In Bangladesh, it's still legal, and thousands of workers are affected. Everyone working in such a room is at risk of damaging their lungs to the extent that they slowly suffocate. Meanwhile, most big fashion labels have promised to no longer allow this production method. But still, there are plenty of workers in Bangladesh forced to continue working this way. This worker is willing to speak to us on condition of anonymity.
Can you assure me that there are jeans sandblasted in Bangladesh at this moment?
Yes, I can. There's a table, there's a thick pipe with a nozzle. When we apply pressure to the nozzle, the sand exits the machine. In a night shift, we make about 5,000 jeans. We're 30 workers. This label is checked in the finishing section, not in ours. We work in the washing section. We only have the body of the pants. Then after us, they go to finishing. That's where I've seen the Levi brand.
What about his health?
Levi's tells us that these can only have been counterfeit jeans. What should I say? I can't say that this work is good, because it isn't. Everyone is affected by this work. We breathe in the sand. And there are no doctors. We're getting worse and worse every day. In Bangladesh, nobody is looking out for the interests of sick sandblasting workers. In Istanbul, former sandblasting workers are dealing with the after effects of their work, an illness known as silicosis. Hundreds of these workers are being treated at a university clinic that specializes in lung diseases. Mehmet Basak is one of them. He worked in the jeans industry for 10 years. Today he's seriously ill and suffers from chronic headaches, fever and acute shortness of breath. 2/3 of his lungs are clogged up with sand particles. His doctor is one of the world's leading specialists for lung diseases.
Silikoz hastalığının hiçbir tedavisi yok.
Silicosis is an illness that can't be healed, but it can be avoided by banning sandblasting. There's no excuse for allowing so many young people to die from this illness. It was only due to pressure from us that this production method was banned.
Genç yaşta insanları ölüme mahkum ediyoruz.
Even the regular checkups are a strain for Mehmet Basak. Fortunately, the hospital in Istanbul is well equipped, which means that Mehmet can be treated until a suitable donor lung can be found. It's his only chance, as the damage cannot be reversed. We're in the east of Turkey, in Mehmet Basak's birthplace, a region troubled by civil war for many years. There are no modern hospitals here, nor are there any statistics on the number of people who've died as a result of sandblasting, but survivors estimate at least 100 such deaths in this region alone. This was my friend Fahrettin Firat. He died in 2014. Firat was only 27 years old. Sebahattin worked with him in Istanbul. The entire cemetery is full of graves of sandblasting victims. In this village alone, more than 300 men worked in jeans factories in Istanbul. They all dreamed of a better life. but many are illiterate and can only speak Kurdish. They had to take the work they could get. On the left side, that's me. And this is my nephew, and that's my cousin. They're all dead. Sebahattin is expecting to end the same way. He's been told his lungs have already suffered irreparable damage. I don't want more people to die of that terrible disease. My family lost everything. No more bread to eat. They have stolen my breath. All men are dead or ill. They've forgotten us here, and there's still no justice. We're dying and nobody cares about it. They were all day laborers. They had no work contracts and can therefore not prove who is responsible for their slow death. After sandblasting was banned, the jeans industry came up with another method. Potassium permanganate, a toxic chemical, is now used to achieve the used look. What does the lung doctor think of this? The protective masks given to these workers are not at all safe. Potassium permanganate is a highly toxic substance. Nobody should be exposed to it. A curtain is supposed to protect the worker from the dangerous gas. There is no silicosis risk, but it can give workers asthma, bronchitis or other illnesses. One health threat was just replaced by another.
Kötü koşullarda çalışıyorlar. Silikoz değil ama bu da kötü.
Clearly, the jeans manufacturers still don't really care about the health of their workers. We've come to the factory where Mehmet Bazak used to work, and we found diesel jeans being produced here. Was the Italian company producing jeans here also when he was working here as a sandblaster? We asked Mehmet Bazak. Yes, diesel. Was that the only brand? There were many brands, 17 or 19 companies. We produced for all the big name brands. The international jeans manufacturers knew about the deadly sandblasting. Yes, they filmed us doing it. They even brought us samples to show us what the jeans should look like after the treatment. I remember foreigners coming and filming us to show others how it's done. Diesel refused to comment on the health of former sandblasters. The company says it stopped using the method in 2012. Apparently, they'd rather forget this chapter altogether. It's not that easy for Mehmet Bazak. He's sued his former employer for grievous bodily harm. He's not the only one. More than 20 cases have been brought to court already, and some of the former sandblasters have won. Most of them were given compensation, but Mehmet Bazak wants those responsible to face criminal charges. His lawyer hopes the case will set a precedent.
Bunun dışında bütün dünyada bu işin değişik versiyonları tabii ki kod kumlama.
This is not just a problem in Turkey. Many workers have become sick due to sandblasting all over the world. Whether they'll get justice depends a lot on the outcome of this trial. If we can get a final verdict, it'll send a strong signal. And other cases must follow. Because the subcontractors for whom these people work sell the jeans to huge international businesses. It's the business practices of these international fashion labels that has caused the illness of Mehmet and his colleagues.
Yakalanmasının sebebi dünya çapında büyük olan bu firmaların bu tarz politikaları. Şöyle şu tarafa doğru yürüyelim gelin.
But so far, none of the big brand companies have been prosecuted. Contractors in Paris, New York or Milan continue to profit from a fashion trend that has proved lethal for so many workers. Back in Bangladesh, despite industry promises to the contrary, the workers at the low end of the fashion industry continue to get sick and die as a result of our insatiable desire for cheap fashion. whether it's due to sandblasting, toxins, dangerous buildings, or burning sewing machines. The French lawyer Marie-Laure Ghislain with the NGO Sherpa is trying to set a legal precedent. She's fighting to secure a conviction against French fashion discounter Auchan for violating the basic rights of textile workers. To assist the investigation of French state prosecutors, the lawyer is collecting evidence at another Auchan supplier. She's going through a checklist to see if the company really lives up to the promises it makes to its customers. She finds open pots of textile dye spreading their toxic fumes everywhere. Auchan guarantees its customers that they never put the health of workers at risk. But they don't even have protective clothing here. In the storage room for toxic chemicals, she observes several safety breaches. There are just a few signs on the wall warning workers. One of the seamstresses tells us about the health hazards posed by these chemicals.
From the chemicals, from the clothes, I feel nauseous. But if I say I smell the chemicals and it bothers me, they tell me, you can't go to work in another area. They tell me, you need to get back to work.
At the end of her research trip, Ghislain assesses her findings. She has 16 witness statements to give the state prosecution, along with hundreds of photos and many hours of video footage that she hopes will prove that Auchan is misleading its customers.
I'll give the state prosecutor this evidence for his review. I think it's strong enough to convince him that there really is a big discrepancy between Auchan's code of conduct and the reality on the ground. This is a case of fraudulent marketing.
She hopes the evidence from Bangladesh will be enough to fill the gaps in the state prosecutor's investigation. But this is not the case. Back in the northern French city of Lille, the state prosecutor has dropped the case against Auchan due to insufficient evidence. In France, citizens have the right to submit their case directly to a judge, but only if the state prosecutor has not followed due process in the investigation.
Our analysis of the findings of the investigation shows that only people in authority at Auchan were questioned. There was no effort to investigate in Bangladesh. And the prosecution has overlooked the fact that Auchan knew about the violations against safety and health regulations at its suppliers, but still continued to order from them. Auchan's own reports show this, and the prosecutors knew of these.
Two other NGOs have joined the case. The union, which is represented by Auchan's Works Council, also supports the investigation. For the first time ever, a French corporation is being taken to court in France accused of having misled its customers as to the working conditions at its contractors in low-wage countries. The case is going to court. No matter what the verdict, it's already a unique case in Europe. So what does the discounter say about these allegations? For months we've been asking for an interview, but nobody at Auchan wants to talk to us on camera. We make one last effort, but again nobody is willing to talk. In a press release, the company states that it has signed the Accord agreement and is only producing in factories that comply with the agreed social standards. And it points out that the first case against Auchan was dropped. But in future, things could get a lot more difficult for large corporations in France. After 2 years in the making, the French National Assembly is set to vote on a new law. It set out to make companies registered in France liable if they do not uphold human rights throughout their supply chain anywhere in the world. Dominique Portier, in the governing Socialist Party, makes a last appeal to parliamentarians.
Elle est novatrice parce qu'elle établit qu'à l'échelle du monde.
The law is innovative. France is paving the way with this law for a new Europe and a new world order that also applies to large corporations.
Les plus grandes pour commencer, les plus grandes sociétés.
If this succeeds, no company can dodge its responsibility by referring to a catalogue of honourable but unachieved goals. We come to vote. Who is in favour of this law? Who is against it? The majority are in favour and the new law is passed. Now French companies could face fines of up to 10 million euros and class action suits.
Le moment où on est aujourd'hui, c'est l'épreuve de vérité.
Finally, the time has come where we've gone beyond merely talking and making empty promises. Now the challenge is to really make the corporations in charge liable for ensuring they live up to their responsibility. They make themselves guilty when laws are broken for their sake. It's not about punishment, but the possibility of punishment. This is the only way to prevent companies offending in the first place.
Nous savons par réalisme simplement que sans possibilité de sanction, il n'y aura pas de véritable prévention pour tous.
For years, fashion chains have been promising fair working conditions, but many continue to violate labour laws and human rights. France has now set a legal precedent making such business practices a criminal offence. Those affected are now able to bring such companies to court, even the seamstresses in Bangladesh. Hopefully, the rest of Europe will follow.